Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our March 23rd Microsoft 365 Meetup for Government event. Happy to have you all here. And for any who are able to join ahead of time, I'm going to moderate the group now. So if you do need to ask a question or would like to make a comment as we go, feel free to use the raise your hand function and we can allow you to unmute and have you ask your question. So for tonight's event, we have two exciting presentations about the Power Platform. First off, we're going to have Steve Winward from Microsoft do a kind of Power Platform overview, followed by our guest presenters from Vamonos IT, Joe Tyner, Dave Harrison, and Robert Spencer, who will be talking about using the Power Apps and Power Platform to run zero trust and administration. So really excited to hear their presentation and thoughts. For those who are new to our community mission is really to drive kind of activity and engagement and allow people to interact and network for those who are working within the Microsoft 365 and government space. So if you have an interest in either of those, then this is the right place for you. And we have some basic community standards. These should be self-explanatory, but please be respectful and considerate towards others. We certainly want to have fun, and it's okay to be silly, but definitely we want to make sure that we're being kind and professional. This is not a forum for proprietary or non-public or sensitive information. So definitely, please, use some thought before you share something in this group, particularly if it is sensitive or a trade secret. Additionally, while we certainly want people to be able to self-promote or promote their offerings, you certainly are free to do that, but definitely don't spam or otherwise kind of abuse everybody's attention and platform. And as needed, the community organizers will moderate when and where we need to. And in particular, nothing that's shared tonight represents Microsoft or its views. Some of us may work for Microsoft as employees, but we're here in our personal capacity. And that's certainly equally true for anyone who may be coming from other organizations or a government employee or anything else. We're here to exchange information, have fun, learn, network. We're not representing our official capacities. So certainly want to highlight two of my co-collaborators and our community organizers, Andrew Kagan and Andy Oak. They've been great partners in helping to facilitate and get this community off the ground. So happy to have their help. If you are interested in being a volunteer or helping to organize and facilitate these events, certainly please reach out and we'd be happy to talk to you. But big thanks to both Andrew and Andy for their contributions so far. And Planet Technologies is one of the sponsors of this meetup community. For those who don't know me, I'm Nick Giard. I'm an Office 365 technical specialist within Microsoft Federal. So if you're interested in connecting with me on social media, please use one of the links there and add me, and happy to talk to you. And if you are new to Teams, so Teams is obviously a part of Microsoft 365. It is the platform that we're using for these meetings as well. So if it is, there's certainly most of it should be pretty straightforward. But the most important thing probably to realize is there's that little face with the hand. So if that is how you can use to raise or lower your hand, and then we can unmute you, or please use the chat function, and you're welcome to ask questions in the chat as well. So, and then I just want to do a quick shout out for our upcoming event. We are probably going to be moving towards one event a month. Just, I know everybody's busy, so we're going to try that model for a little bit and see how it works out. So one of our community members, Lieutenant Commander Ian Leatherman, is going to be doing a presentation on using the cloud for zero trust and chaos engineering. So very excited to hear his thoughts and experiences around using Microsoft 365 and how he's applied that to some of the mission problems that he tries to solve in his role. So looking forward to that. So definitely set that on your calendar for April 20th. If you are also interested in being a presenter, please submit your content ideas through our call for content form, and we will be happy to work with you to schedule them. And as far as it is very important to get feedback, feedback is a gift. So please take the time. I will put the link in the chat as well, both for this session and our speakers tonight. Please give us feedback about what worked well, what you liked, what you'd like to see more of, anything you thought they did well or could do better. And we'll make sure to provide that feedback to them, as well as use it to kind of guide the future activities for this group and the type of content we want to have. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Steve Winward. So Steve, please take it away, and thank you for coming tonight and presenting.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. All right, so my name is Steve Winward. I'm a technical specialist at Microsoft, and today's first kind of 30-minute session is going to be just introductory to Power Platform. If you want to connect with me, you can go to stevewinward.com. That'll forward to my LinkedIn profile, and feel free to kind of connect with me that way. Also, just wanted to share, this was a recent thing that I started doing about 3 months ago. I started my own YouTube channel. So I've been trying to put very tailored content around Power Platform, specifically in our government clouds. So some of the demos that I'll show at the end of this presentation will be kind of from these videos, but feel free to kind of check that out. Feel free to subscribe. But I try to put a lot of kind of tailored government stuff in that channel. The other thing I wanted to share with is, recently was Pi Day, and there was this really amazing video. If you haven't seen it, check it out, from Veritasium, on just how Isaac Newton, discovered how to calculate pi. And I wanted to share that really quickly and just kind of relate to me what that means with what we call the Power Platform at Microsoft. So we're going to go kind of back in time here. There was a mathematician named Ludolf van Keulen from 1540 to 1610, and he was obsessed with getting the most precise version of pi that he could possibly compute. At the time, the way that people would estimate the value of pi is that they would create these polygons around the circle. And what they would do is they would create just higher and higher and higher sides of polygons to get close to a circle. And that's how they would do that. They would brute force the computation of pi that way. So Ludolf van Keulen came up with a sided polygon that was 2 to the 62nd power. And if you see what that is expanded out, I think it's something like 4 quintillion sides. That got him to this approximation of pi, which I think goes out to like 20 decimals. It took Ludolf 25 years to get to that level of precision of pi. In fact, on his tombstone, he had this approximation of pi engraved on his tombstone. That's just how much of his life he dedicated to computing the accuracy of pi. And then we fast forward to Isaac Newton. So about 50 years later, Isaac Newton comes onto the scene. And in 1666, I think he was about 20 years old at the time, he was actually quarantining due to the bubonic plague. I don't know if that seems familiar to anybody else, but that was kind of striking to me. And while he was quarantining, he also invented calculus, by the way, too, which was kind of fascinating. And he was able to use calculus and this older thing called the binomial theorem, combine those together, and actually do it in such a way that he reduced the previous best guess, which was Ludolf van Keulen's approximation of 4 quintillion sides, down to an equation that only had 50 terms. And so when you do that, you go from something that took 25 years to compute previously to just a matter of days to get pi. Total game changer, right? This isn't something that linearly changed kind of how you can get to the precision of pi. Like, this was a dramatic exponential increase with what you could do at the time. It was fascinating, state of the art. And I mentioned all this, one of my favorite quotes is actually from Isaac Newton. And what he says is, "If I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants." And I think when we apply this to technology, really we're standing on the shoulders of developers. And now I want to kind of switch gears back to the Power Platform. To me, we really view the Power Platform, or this low code kind of evolution, as the ability to empower everybody in an organization to be able to create applications. Historically, the challenge is that only the very skilled people that were incredibly deep on development on the far left of this could do the custom application development. Low code and what kind of the Power Platform brings is this ability for really anybody in the organization, more people than historically just the developers, to now be able to create applications. And so this is kind of, to me, that's standing on the shoulders of developers right there. That's the opportunity that we're talking about for Power Platform. So what is the Power Platform? It's a couple of things. At a high level, it's low code in the sense that you're not going to be coding in the traditional way you would to be able to create solutions. Power Apps is this ability to create applications really quickly that both work in a web and also on your phone. Power Automate is all about workflow automation. If you've ever done SharePoint work in the past where you've used something like SharePoint Designer, think of Power Automate as SharePoint Designer, but for all cloud services, not just SharePoint. Power BI is our visualization tooling that lets you create visualizations and really kind of rich reports, once again, just through kind of drag and drop. And then we also have Power Virtual Agents, which are coming soon in kind of the government space. But really, that's about creating kind of chat bots that you can kind of train a model of common questions people might ask and be able to respond automatically to that. Now, the other thing I wanted to show here is just kind of a picture of the other Microsoft Cloud services that work with Power Platform. Power Platform is really just built on top of our Azure services. And so when we talk to people about kind of the Power Platform, it's really a combination of people being able to use the Power Platform to create applications, but you can also work side by side with development teams too in your organization. So Power Platform does not replace the need for developers. There's always going to be very complex, very challenging problems that you still need custom development for. The idea is that you can bring the two groups together. Maybe you have a custom development team that's able to build additional components in the Power Platform that then the rest of the people in your organization could take advantage of. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is that the Power Platform is accredited to FedRAMP High. It is under the Microsoft Azure for Government accreditation documentation. So if you're looking for that, just make sure you go to the Azure for Government accreditation, and that's where you can go to get the details on that. Now, these are just some numbers of kind of worldwide people that are using the Power Platform. Today, there's over 500,000 organizations using it, with with 90% of the Fortune 500 companies. And so there's been tons of growth in this space. And I'm just going to zoom into the products here, and then we'll pivot to a demo at the end. Here's just kind of a screenshot of Power Apps. Once again, Power Apps is the ability to create applications quickly for your organization. The screenshot here is what's called a model-driven app in Power Apps. And there's really two kinds of apps in Power Apps. Canvas apps, which are things that are tailored for your phone, and then also model-driven apps that have business process workflows associated with that. In this screenshot here, we're actually looking at some of the built-in reporting that you get inside of Power Apps, where when you have your data stored in the Power Platform and Dataverse, it's really easy to kind of create reports off of that. Also, this is available in GCC and GCC High today. Power Automate, once again, that's the kind of the business process, the workflow automation engine in the Power Platform. This is a screenshot of kind of the tooling that you would use to create. But effectively, Power Automate gives you a bunch of connectors that are already built to connect to things like in Office 365. You could say, when I get an email in my inbox, automatically kick off a flow. Maybe I'll then have an approval process. Maybe I could put something into OneDrive. Maybe you want to connect to something in Azure. There's just connectors available that you can just drag and drop to kind of create that workflow process for you. And here's a screenshot of the connectors. This is a screenshot of the connectors available in our commercial cloud. In the government space, there are fewer connectors because of the FedRAMP accreditation process. And if you go, you can actually see what the different availability is on our documentation. We'll lay it out there and say that this connector is available in commercial, this one's available in GCC, this one's available in GCC High. So our public documentation has the availability of the connectors for any connector you might be interested in. And this I wanted to mention, so Power Automate, what I showed previously are, you can think of those are called cloud flows. Now we've recently acquired a company called Softomotive, who had some really amazing, what's called robotic process automation capabilities, or RPA. RPA is really used for places where there isn't a well-defined API you can go against a source to get the data. Think of maybe like a legacy desktop application that you need to automate, or there's a legacy web application that in your organization you have to manually enter data into a form to do that. Since there's no well-defined API, really the only opportunity you have to automate that is to actually record the clicks on the screen. That's what Power Automate Desktop does, and I'll show you the outcome of one of those in the demo after this. Then we also have Power BI. So this is really just rich visualizations that you can create really easy against a whole slew of data sources. And the really cool thing here is that you can actually tailor the experience differently to when people are looking at this through the browser versus when people are, for example, looking at it on the phone, which we kind of see here. You can tailor that experience, but seamlessly works with kind of everything in Office 365, Azure, and also data from the Power Platform as well. AI Builder is also something that is new in the commercial space, coming to the GovClouds estimated kind of the summer of this year. Um, I'll show this in the demo as well, but the really kind of one of the core use cases here is forms processing. Think of when you get all these different forms sent to you, and maybe you have to take that and then manually enter that data into another system. You can create a low-code model where you're training forms processing what your forms look like and tagging different fields with the fields you actually want to extract. And you can do that all automatically. That's really what AI Builder is about. There's other things too where you can do like object detection. So you could take a picture and it could tell you how many cans of soda are in a vending machine, for example. Or you could do OCR, right, where you just take a picture and it'll just get the straight text off of that picture for you. And lastly, Power Virtual Agents also coming tentatively kind of summer of this year in the GovCloud space. Once again, just low-code chatbots, really easy to kind of create that model. And then what you can do is you can embed that into an application so that customers can actually interact with that in an automated fashion where they can ask questions. It can do things like look up on the back end. You can define all of that logic. But the end user experiences, all the responses are automated for what they get back. And lastly, the Dataverse. It used to be called Common Data Service. So if you've heard that term, Dataverse is just the rebranding of that same service. Dataverse is really just a low-code solution for creating and modeling data for your application. When you're using Power Apps, you can actually then write directly to the Dataverse. And it's super easy to do that. It's also super secure. You get a lot of security benefits with that approach as well. I like your comment there. Dataverse is much better. Thanks, Nick. All right, so we got about 20 minutes. We're going to switch gears. I've got 3 demos. All of these demos are really themed with kind of AI. So I'm going to try to show you these different products, but also kind of tying together how we've infused AI into those. So let's go ahead and kind of switch gears and get into that. Okay, so the first thing I want to show here is an example of a Canvas app in Power Apps that I'm going to run through the web browser, but this could just as easily run on my phone. And what I've done is I've set this up so that it's going to actually allow me to take a photo and then process that to get any text that it's getting out of it. So it's a very simple thing. I actually created a YouTube video on how I built this whole thing. So if you like this demo, feel free to check out the YouTube video and you can actually see the details. I've got this solution posted on GitHub as well, so you can kind of get started really quickly with that. Now, in this case here, I have a drop down for all of the different camera inputs that I have available. I'm going to choose my Surface camera in this case here. So you're going to see a slightly different angle of me. If you're looking at Teams, you're probably seeing me in a couple different angles here. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this picture of something I just wrote today. And if I click on this, it takes an image of that. I'm going to then process that image. And now, when we do that, what it's doing under the covers is it's actually, in this case, talking to Azure for Government's cognitive services, processing that image, translating it into text, and then we get the results there of Hello M365 group. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't get the exclamation points quite right. It did the L's instead, but I think it did a pretty good job there. So that's just an example of a Canvas app that you could do. The way that I created that was just all drag and drop. I'm actually under the covers when I was clicking the submit button or the process button here. That is then calling a Power Automate Cloudflow, which then can talk to Azure for Government to do the image processing in that case. That's the first example that I wanted to show. The next one that I wanted to show is going to be RPA. So let's go ahead and kind of switch over to a VM here. So I've got an Azure VM here that I already have the RPA, the Power Automate desktop tooling, and everything connected for this to run properly. But I want to show you kind of the data I'm dealing with to kind of just show you how this is all going to work. So on my desktop, I have some sample files of forms. I've got a series of digitally filled out forms. So it's this Kintoso food sign up form. And there's things like event name, date, location, type of food, who's going to be the volunteer, some contact information. So I've got a bunch of those types of forms, but I also have people that filled these out not digitally, but by hand. And what they did is then they filled it out by hand, they scanned it, and then they sent it over. The challenge I have is that I have this web app in my organization that I need to translate this document, put it into this legacy web app, submit that. And then once I do that, then I have all the data in one place and I could export it into, for example, a CSV. But in this case, maybe I have hundreds of these forms and I don't want to have to manually look at the document, read every field, put that into this web app, and then click the submit button. So how would you go about automating that? Let me show you the flow running, and then we'll kind of back into kind of how this worked. So what I've got here is this is the Power Automate service in Office 365. And I created this particular flow. In this case, it was called Power Automate Model Test. Let's just look at kind of what this flow looks like. In this case, I set it up so it was manually triggered. I could have done this a number of ways. I could have said when this document lands in a SharePoint document library, go ahead and execute it. Maybe when it hits my email or some other way to kind of start that. I then actually just have an action here to call the AI builder step of the model I trained for this actual form. I pass it the document that gets sent in. I then call an RPA step where I'm actually taking all of the individual fields that I extracted from that form, passing it in here into that action. And then lastly, I just send an email confirmation when it's done. So let's go ahead and run this and kind of see what happens here. So I'm going to say test. We'll manually run this. Second here. And what it's going to do is it's going to prompt me now for a file. In this case, I'll choose one of the handwritten examples. And now the way that this one was set up is I do have to say that it's a PDF file. You don't have to do that if you always know it's going to be a PDF file, but in that case, I just did that. Let's go watch this live. So what we're doing now is we're actually watching this flow run live. This demo I also have on YouTube as well. So if you're interested in kind of how this was built, you can go ahead to watch that. But okay, so we're actually watching this thing kick off. So I've kicked it off from the cloud. It's then going to take that document, pass it to AI Builder, which just succeeded because we see that green checkbox just got checked. It's now going to run something locally. So what we'll see in a second is that legacy web app is going to launch on my screen, and we'll see each field. Actually, here we go. Each field is now getting pumped in. And look, my hands are up, right? I'm not on the keyboard. It's being totally automated into the web app. It's going to click the submit button. And then what it's going to do is it's actually going to extract that record ID, which in this case is 2021-2676, send that into an email. So there's a couple of different kind of things going on here, but like with the short amount of time, I wanted to just show you one thing of the art of the possible. And I think that this is something, especially in the federal government space where there's tons of standardized forms, there's tons of manual data entry. I think this is an amazing way to really automate how a lot of those things today are just unfortunately manually inputted. That was successful. Now the last thing I wanted to wrap up with, Nick, I think we got till 5:40. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got some time. Although I do want to know, just out of curiosity, Steve, how long did it take you to build that?
So surprisingly not long. And I know if you go into here, so one part of it was into AI Builder. And so effectively here you create a new model and you upload the files for that. And unfortunately, like I can't show that right now because I think this would take a little bit of time, but you go in here, you create a new model. And what it does is it scans this in and it'll actually like show you boxes around the text it's detecting. Oh, I just hit my mic, sorry about that. It'll show boxes around the text it's finding and you'll just, oh, this wasn't quite right, and you can actually modify where the rectangle is. That's all you're doing. you have to do at least 5 forms to train the model. You can do more, but there's a minimum of 5. Once you do that, you're off to the races. This demo end to end took maybe like an hour or 2 to put together. A lot of the time was actually me creating this legacy web app. That was part of the time too. But the model itself was pretty quick.
It's amazing. I worked on a project not, maybe 10 years ago that wasn't that much more sophisticated than your demo, and I think it was like 6 months of developer time to build
Yeah.
and a whole
And
contract. So that's pretty cool.
yeah, and so I think this is really cool. You're going to see more and more of this kind of stuff rolling out to Power Platform. This example is built on Azure Cognitive Services, right? We have this world-class kind of AI service. This is just built on top of that, but it's done in such a way it's really simple to get started and really kind of easy to kind of build that out. Okay. The last demo, we're going to switch over to Power BI. And what I want to show first is just an open source data set that I pulled some data in and want to show you then kind of what I'm going to do with it. So this is an open source site on DoD personnel numbers, and you could go into here and you can see things like every one of these is an Excel file of where, for example, like people in the Navy and Marine Corps and Air Force are broken out. I think it's by state. And it's just got high number aggregates. But what I thought would be interesting would be to pull this data into Power BI and visualize that and kind of just see if there's any trends or patterns or anomalies. So that's just the data. Let me go in and show you the Power BI report. Now, I've done some work to already pull this in, but I wanted to just kind of highlight once again some of the AI things that are in Power BI to make it easier to get insights out of your data. So we'll let this load. Okay. And so right now, this will load in a second. I have a very simple line graph. This is showing the Air Force personnel numbers over time. Now, this data is also from just the level of granularity. If you go into this, there's a state associated with every record. So when I'm looking here, I'm looking at like all of the US numbers over time, but under the covers, each row has a state element to that. So I've got this one line graph here, and I could say, you know what, there's this interesting increase from this date to this date. Let's go ahead and right click that and say analyze to explain the increase. This is pretty cool here. So what this is doing, this is actually using AI locally on my machine to then say from that date to the present date, what contributed to the increase? Now, the level of granularity are in the states. And what you can see here is in plain English, it'll tell you Texas, Virginia, and Mississippi had the largest increase among state, offsetting the decrease of Colorado. So in this case, Colorado went down, but these other states still went up, and it was more than what the one state went down, which led to an increase. Now, this all got created for me automatically, and it's telling me kind of what's going on. If you like this visual, you can click the little plus icon, and then that adds it to the report for you. So now I've got this locally. If I wanted to share this with people, I would then publish this to the Power BI service. We'll go ahead and save that. And we'll publish it, in this case, to my workspace. And then I'll just show you one quick thing you can do kind of in the Power BI service once this is published, and then we'll wrap up there. All right, so that got published. Let's go into the Power BI service. So if I refresh this, we should see that new report that we just published. And now I'm going to show you a slightly different flavor of AI once it's published in the service. So right here, I'm going to right click the data set. I'm going to go to Get Quick Insights. And this is going to, instead of looking at that one data point that we just did, this is looking at all of the data all up. And it's going to look at just, are there correlations or patterns or trends? What's going on? So for example, Virginia and California had noticeably more people in Navy. That makes sense, right? Because Navy personnel are going to be on the coast, on the East and West Coast. Let's see here. I recently broke the scroll bar on my mouse, so I'm struggling a little bit. But if we go down here, Texas has noticeably more Air Force for this particular date. California and North Carolina have noticeably more Marine Corps, right? So it's finding things automatically for you. Maybe you already know about these things, maybe you don't, but the idea here is just another thing in your toolkit to try to find things that may be interesting in your data. And so that kind of wraps up what I wanted to show you all. I know that was really quick. If you have questions about any of these things, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a note. I'd be happy to kind of follow up with you all. If any of these things individually were interesting, I'd be happy to also do maybe a follow-up deep dive kind of thing as well. Some of my YouTube videos do kind of showcase these things in more depth too. But with that, if we have time, we could do some questions, Nick, or what's
Yeah, let's. I think there's already some questions in the chat, so and we definitely do have time. So I know I will actually change it so anyone who wants to come, we'll try this. Wants to come off mute, but Garrett, I know you had a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask it real quick, or do you want me to just read it from the chat?
No, I got it. Yeah, I've been using a lot of the that website that was referenced previously. I remember I went through a whole demo and there was something I couldn't do, so it kind of stopped me in my tracks. But I have to circle back and figure out what I did, what stopped me. So I've been pushing forward on Power Apps and Power Platform. I mean Power Automate instead.
Okay. What, Garrett, was there something specific with Power Automate or Power Apps that you're struggling with?
No, it was Power BI. That's,
Power BI. Okay.
The specific thing is I can't remember it right now, but it was something I could not do. I didn't have the rights or something. Okay. So that's all.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Are there any, Steve? Are there any particularly good learning tools that you've found for Power BI? Because I know that's one of the it's a really, because it's a little bit of a newer product, within the last, I don't know, guess what, like four years or so. Yeah. What do you usually recommend to people?
Yeah, a couple of things here. Let me actually pull up one thing really quickly. I have, I didn't mention this, but I actually have a GitHub repository for Power BI. And in there, I've got some learning paths. Let me bring that up. I'll put the link in the chat too. But if you go here on the homepage, I've got some training resources here. There's a guided learning on Power BI, which is kind of neat. It just kind of step-by-step walks you through common things you would do in Power BI. How to use some of the core visuals, how to kind of pull out data. Guy in a Cube is just a really amazing YouTube thing all around Power BI. There are two Microsoft employees that do that. They have fantastic content. There's also freely available partner-led Power BI dashboard in a day events too, and I'll make sure there's a link here. I don't think I have that yet, but let me put this in the chat. You all have that. But I think that would be a good place to go. And the other thing too that I'll have to update, but we've started putting more and more Power BI stuff into Microsoft Online Learning as well. So there's some things there too.
Great.
And another question, any good resources for Power Automate? Yeah, so if you search, let me see if I can pull that up. So we have, if you've not seen this, we've got a lot of different kind of learning paths on our Microsoft documentation. If you search for that, I'll put this one into the chat. But we've got that for Power Automate. We have that for Power Apps. We have that for RPA now as well. But this is kind of where a lot of things are going. They're pretty cool. You can also, if you sign in, you can get credits for all these things that you're doing as well. But these have been really well done. So that's another really good place for Power Automate and Power Apps. Any other questions?
Do you have any recommendations for people who are comfortable with coding processes and things like Git for working in Power Automate? For example, in Power Automate, you can't save a in progress, a work in progress thing. Are there any workflow things that can help when a team has members at different skill levels?
Yeah, so and I just want to make sure I understand your question. Is the question around how would you version things in Power Automate, or is it just you have maybe some developers and maybe some non-developers, and how would you work together? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, basically sort of all of that. Okay. We definitely have people of different skill levels, and would love to be able to leverage it as a tool, but if you're used to a coding background, it can be painful to have to navigate back and forth and configure things, by hand. And I was just wondering if there was some tips that might make that more convenient for everybody.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. Like one, if you wanted to have a deeper dive conversation, like we could do that offline too, because I know we're running up on time. But in Power Automate, I would say if you've got like people that are more developer centric, you can actually create custom connectors in the Power Automate platform so that when end users are creating Power Automate flows, you could maybe have some custom business organizational actions that are just available right here. That could be one way you could kind of differentiate. The developers could maybe extend what's in Power Automate, and then the end users could create these things. The other thing you could do is if you want to do like things like version control, you could look into what's called solutions in the Power Platform. You can package things like Power Automate flows inside of a solution, which then gives you things like version control and ways to kind of go across multiple environments. So if you have like dev, test, prod, you could do that as well.
Yeah. Azure, Steve, just to add to that, I mean, it also may be a scenario where that's a good solution for Azure Logic apps, right? Because Power Automate is really targeted at more of that end user, citizen developer, power user workspace. And then Logic apps are the same technology, but are targeted more at the IT pro dev type. So some of the tooling and the way you do it is a little more code-like.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you could certainly like call both, you know, a Logic app from a Power Automate flow and things like that. But yeah, that's a really good point.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, it looks like we let's do one more question. I know there's a question from Dan Nelson, and then I want to make sure we have full time for our other presenters tonight. And then if we certainly at the end, any questions folks have, Steve, unless you have a hard stop, we can continue any other questions. So, Dan, do you want to ask your question, or do you want us to read it off for you? Oh, or it looks like Yazir asked first. So either Dan or Yazir, if you want to.
Can I pull data from Excel? Sorry, I'm just reading some of the things from Yazir. Can I pull data from Excel data to create a history workbook? I'm not sure I understand that one without getting some clarification.
Okay, well, let's circle back to the questions for Steve at the end, and definitely, Steve, unless you have to drop off, we can continue some of the discussion there. So, and thank you, Steve. Great job. Really, I learned a lot just from watching that. So thank you. Great start. I'm excited to go use some of your GitHub resources. So without further ado, I want to introduce our other guest presenters for this evening. Coming to us from Vamonos IT, Joe Tyner, Dave Harrison, Robert Spencer. I'm not sure if there's, I know you guys have a couple other folks joining us as well. So if I miss calling anyone out, please introduce yourselves. But Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Nick. I appreciate it. Can everyone hear and see me all right? Great. Thanks, Nick. All right. I'm just going to take over sharing for a minute. Okay. Like Nick said, my name's Joe Tyner. I'm an engineer over at Vamonos IT. We are an IT services out of Northern Virginia. We support multiple federal customers, and you know, more pertinent to this call, we support Office 365 environments and Azure environments for a few federal customers. And you know, I want to talk to you a little bit today on how we're using the Power Platform to, you know, help these customers solve, you know, real world problems, you know, with practical solutions that don't cost a lot of money, you know, today. All right. So a little bit about us. You know, we have for the past few years been supporting customers within DHS and migrating them from their on-prem environments into Office 365 and Azure. So, some of our customers are listed here. You know, just a couple of highlights of what we've been able to do with the Office 365 stack. and technologies, 150,000 mailboxes migrated, 20,000 distribution groups. We've transitioned hundreds of thousands of users from Skype to Teams only, very large data migrations from file servers into OneDrive, and of course, over hundreds of thousands of SharePoint sites into SharePoint Online. So I just tell you that to say the engineers from our team on this call just have a large wealth of knowledge around the Office 365 services and that technology as a whole, right? So, today I want to talk to you about, much like Steve said, how we're using this technology to create sort of simple solutions for very complex problems, right? So we're going to give you an example of how a Power App that we've built and then that we're using on multiple customers and on-prem environments today, right? So the challenge, right, that spawn these apps come from, what a lot of solution and technologies do, and that was major problems that existed, and those were this, right? We have, unexperienced technicians working, in a very new technology that can impact thousands of users all at once, right? And a small example of that is, for instance, we had a technician make a mail flow change that they thought was simple for one user, ended up impacting 65,000 people for hours, right? Or another common challenge that our customers brought to us was, this tier 1 person accidentally added 1,000 people to a distribution list that wasn't supposed to be done, right? So, the challenge, in a simple form was to, how do we reduce the ability for these folks to make mistakes, but at the same time keep their ability to do their job, right? And then the secondary was to try to reduce the attack vector, right, that is caused by creating, administrative accounts for hundreds of tier 1 and tier 2 techs. And, so when they brought that challenge to us, we turned to the Power Apps to do that, right? Because, sort of like this quote, right, says it's a technology that allows you to take advantage of a zero trust security model that pushes you to a lower use of tier 1 techs, right? So with that, I'm gonna what we're gonna do is walk you through this app, show you how we use it in a production environment to achieve these goals. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our lead engineer, Mr. Dave Harrison, who's going to walk you through that.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Got it. Thank you.
Loud and clear.
So, yeah, let's first just start with the actual app interface, and then we'll look afterwards at some of the things that are behind the scenes supporting it. We chose Canvas apps for these because of the ability to interface with them on a tablet or a mobile device. A lot of help desk technicians have those type of devices available to them. Even if they don't, though, obviously the Canvas apps still render perfectly fine in the browser. So this is the splash screen for our mailbox permissions management app. This app is a way to both query and then add or remove permissions from mailboxes in Office 365. So pretty basic splash screen here. Once you're in the app, basically the tier 1 tech would search for the mailbox that they intend to adjust permissions for. I'm going to use my mailbox here. It's the guinea pig. Once that's selected, obviously those are mailboxes, in your environment, right? This is using connectors and authorizations from your tenant. So once you select the target mailbox, you query the current permissions. We're kind of driving the tier one tech to start and end everything with a query, right? Just to, help them, double check their work, and also not make any assumptions, right, about what the current state of the mailbox is. So one thing that we did run into, a lot of these mailboxes in a production environment have a very large list of permissions, sometimes thousands of users. I don't really have a good way to duplicate that because we don't have thousands of users in our environment, obviously. But these permissions screens all scroll. They're also searchable, right? In the case that you have a large number of permissions, you can, just start typing and it will narrow down the permissions that it finds. Another thing that we added was the ability to email the current results to yourself. A lot of requests that come in are not really requests to change permissions per se, but sometimes just to check the permissions on the mailbox, right? That's not always something that the owner of the mailbox has kept track of. So these are the emails that are received from the user or to the user from the user. Actually, they're sending this to themselves. Because the PowerUp runs in their context, the user executing the app, so the email comes from them. This is something that can be given to, a manager for review, especially in the case, like I said, of mailboxes with large permission sets.
Yeah, nice thing is you can forward that to whoever, or you can even copy and paste it into Excel if needed.
Yep, add it to a ticket system, anything you need to do with it. So once that's done, if you don't like something you see with the permissions of the mailbox, or there is a request to adjust the permissions, we have kind of two branches of the app. One built around adding permissions. We'll go there. This is a similar interface, right? You're searching for users in your environment that have mailboxes, which means they are eligible to be delegates on another mailbox. Then you have the 3 permission types that you can assign to a mailbox in Exchange Online. So we'll give the admin full access here. You can find multiple users and grant multiple types of access. Basically, you're building a template here. These have not yet been applied to the mailbox, so you can, change your mind, remove one, give a different person access. Obviously, I can just pick out of the drop down here because of the small number of accounts we have, but if need be, you can search. Once you get the template of new permissions the way you would like it, hit add permissions. What this does is pass this data to a Power Automate flow that does some logging and then triggers a Azure Function app. The Azure Function app is what actually makes the connection to Exchange Online using PowerShell to make the permission changes. So again, we're funneling the tier one tech back to querying everything, right? So back to get permissions, we saved the target mailbox in that scenario, so they don't have to research. But if they're feeling cavalier, you don't have to review the permissions. You can just change the target and move on to the next ticket, right? So we can see here the admin now has full access. If, however, this was a request from a user to remove permissions, similar scenario, all of the permission that exists on the mailbox is listed here individually. So you can pick and choose, even using the control key to select multiples and move them over. And again, you're building a template here, right? until you hit the big red button, right? You haven't actually changed anything on the mailbox. So you can change your mind, leave a permission in place, remove a different one, and just get to a spot you're happy with. Again, in the case of thousands of permissions, there is a search function here, right? Just to help narrow it down. Once you have the permissions that you like in the to be removed list, right? You submit those through the flow and the function app.
And this one triggers a different flow with a different Azure function behind it.
Thank you. So back to query again, right? To double check your work or move on to the next ticket. And we can see the permissions were adjusted. So what this app is directly triggering are these Power Automate flows. We have one for each section of the app, right? This is for queries, adds, and removes. The add and remove very similar. Let's check them out. But basically, the reason we involved Power Automate was just so that we could add customer specific requirements to the process, right? Some customers want an approval flow to occur before these changes are made, right? So that a tier 1 tech is actually just submitting a request, and then a tier 2 or a service desk lead would have to approve that request. This is also how we're logging the actions. So we're using calls to SharePoint Online to store these changes in lists, and we're doing that with a third-party identity, right? Because the Power Automate and Power Apps run in the context of the executing user, right? We didn't want the tier 1 techs to have access to the logging location where these audit logs are being stored. So we're using SharePoint app registrations to connect with a service identity, basically, to make the rights to the SharePoint Online site. You can see those here. So we have a list for each section of the app that actually affects changes, to log what permissions were added, or in the case of a removal, what permissions were removed, the target mailbox and the submitter who ran the app. Once that SharePoint portion is complete, then we move on to triggering the function. If for some reason the SharePoint write fails, then we do not affect the change to the mailbox, and we send an email to the requester and CC the administrators of the app here, right, to let them know that there's a flow problem. So we never actually make a change without an audit entry to verify. And if that write to SharePoint is successful, then we invoke the HTTP request to the Azure Function app. These are pretty cool. I don't know if anyone's used these function apps before, but the PowerShell support in these function apps has been greatly improved recently. And also there is support for the PowerShell version that these functions run in, built into a lot of the PowerShell modules that are coming out for Office 365 administration.
Yeah, we were very happy to see that the Connect Exchange Online module supported this. And that was really what enabled us to build these and do this.
So we'll check out one of these functions. So you can see here we're using PowerShell to actually do the work. And we're using all the security features that Azure provides to us, right? We're connecting to an app registration in the tenant where Office 365 lives to make this connection happen. We're using certificate authentication on that connection, and we're storing the password for our certificate and private key in Azure Key Vault and calling it programmatically from this function app. Also, the call to this function from Power Automate is secured using a function key, and it's HTTPS, right? So no one can stumble upon the URL for the function app and use it. And you can also use things like conditional access, right, to further restrict, who can trigger these, right, to like maybe an internal set of IPs or any other conditional access trigger you could imagine, basically.
Yeah, we place the function key within the headers of the call, so it's not part of the URL.
Yep. So these are very nice. This is definitely something to look into if you haven't seen them, because we all have PowerShell code to do a lot of things already. And this is a way that we can interface Power Apps or Power Automate with things that there are not traditional, channels for connection with, right? There's no way to execute PowerShell code, right, in Power Automate to load a module. And some of these things can be done through like a graph connection using HTTP, but a lot of things are not exposed to graph quite yet. So this model that we're using here could basically be moved over to any administrative function that happens directly in the cloud, right? So any of the Exchange Online or Teams or Skype Online or SharePoint Online, any administrative function that you needed to happen against those services, you can execute that code from one of these function apps. In the case that you had some on-prem administrative actions that you wanted to expose through a Power App and a flow, you can do those as well. It's just instead of a function app, you would use, either another Azure automation feature, right? Either a runbook or, maybe a VM that is joined to your internal Active Directory that Power Automate can call and execute scheduled tasks on for you, right? So that you can affect changes against, say, an internal Active Directory or an internal SQL database, right? Basically anything that you could get to from that VM running in Azure, you could administer through the same kind of construct. So I think that's the majority of the demo. That's the entire app. We covered the functions, the logging, and we did look at a flow. We can look at these in a little more detail, but basically it's just a process of taking the data that's collected in the app and kind of massaging that data and breaking it apart into the individual variables you need to then pass to PowerShell. So there's some caveats there, and some.
Yeah, nice that the function, there's a way for the function to pass data back to flow, and then there's also a way to pass data from flow back to the Power App, and that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, you can have some very good error handling that you actually receive meaningful data back to the flow from the function. So the sky is really the limit with this, right? Once you have the app registrations in place and the certificate authentication set up, you can add permissions to your app registration for the other services, or set up separate app registrations, and it's a very secure way to allow a large number of techs to have access to affect some changes without having to give them, actual Exchange Online administrative rights, right? Which is, the issue.
Yep, and the other key issue is also not needing to give them PowerShell access as well.
Yeah, you nailed that one, Robert, right? Because not only is it you don't necessarily want 100 tier 1 techs with PowerShell access, but when you're in a federal customer environment, with the type of security involved, it's not always just as easy as go, oh, install PowerShell on these 100 machines, right? There's lots of other reasons why PowerShell can't exist on those machines. So this is, the web interface is a really simple way, to solve those problems.
Yeah, and because we kind of control this GUI through Power Apps, we can change some things that are not adjustable in native admin interfaces, right? Other pieces of data that we want to display about the users that have permissions to the mailbox, right? You don't really have the option to adjust that output that you see in the GUI by default. Yeah. So by using these, right, we can customize that to meet whatever customer requirements come up.
And another unintended benefit that we weren't even considering when we started this, but soon after we started this, SolarWinds happened, right? And I'm sure just about everyone on this call was impacted in some way. And our customers came to us and said, how can we reduce the attack vector? Well, hey, how does getting rid of 200 admin accounts sound to you, right? That the bad guy, you get those person's credentials and they're just a standard user, right? Because Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is all essentially just a service account doing all this work in the background, not the user who's actually performing the work.
Correct. Yes. Yep. So they don't have to hold any administrative privileges. A piece of malware on their workstation doesn't expose their cloud administrative access to an attacker. They're just using a standard user account to access the Power App, and all of the work happening behind the scenes is done with a modern kind of service identity style construct, which is an Azure app registration.
Right. And now that you and Robert have accomplished, I mean, would you say that, you can easily modify this to do pretty much anything that can be done in PowerShell, right? You can build that around this same model.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. So, I mean, when you think of it in that mindset, the potential of this technology is limitless. And I actually believe this is going to change the way we do low-level IT administration in the future, right? There's just no more, at least in the Microsoft stack, there's just no more longer a need, to give these folks access and permission with this type of technology. It's great, and our customers love it.
Hey, Dave, I see Ken had a question there about the auditing. I know we kind of touched it. Maybe we can go back and show him, the SharePoint list and the auditing, and show that every change that's made by this app is logged and shows the target and the submitter and the permissions changed.
Absolutely. It's very hard to see the chat when you're presenting, so thank you for that. Yeah, so because of that scenario, right, the fact that the users themselves are not making these changes, the auditing is very important, because otherwise, in the native auditing tools, this all just looks like the app registration making all of these changes, right? So that's why we are using SharePoint Online here to store the audit events that are generated from the executions of the app, right? So the remove changes that I submitted just a few minutes ago, right? The target mailbox was my own mailbox, and and then the permissions that I removed were full access for the admin and send on behalf of for Chris Current. And similarly, the set mailbox, I was the target, I was also the submitter, and I was granting those two those accesses, right, that I then removed. So the scenario here, right, is that a service desk lead or a supervisor has read access to this site. The individual techs do not, or wouldn't by default, but could easily be given access, right, to view, so that, you know, if there's ever a question about who submitted those changes, you know, which happens, right? You get two users requesting different changes to the same mailbox without knowing each other, have both called the help desk. You have the ability to come back here and research and find where, you know, the two techs were kind of fighting against each other, because that definitely happens. And also, one feature that we didn't have a chance to show, let me do that now. If I change the target mailbox, let's use Jenny's mailbox. We're able to get permissions for her mailbox, because there's no harm in querying, right? But we are restricting the ability to manage her mailbox through this app, right? So in this case, we have a group, and mailboxes that we place into the group are blacklisted from this app, right? So if we'd say, oh, you know, let me give myself access to this mailbox. If we try to add or remove permissions, we're told this mailbox cannot be managed, right? Contact the help desk or the service desk.
Right.
So
and the reason we did that was because, you know, our customer said, hey, not only want to reduce the functionality these tier 1 guys have, there's certain mailboxes we don't even want them to touch. If there's a ticket opened against this user, we want it routed directly to you know, a higher tier. So that's why that feature was added.
Yeah, and the key part on the previous thing about the logging in the flow that we chose to do was if for any reason, and I think we kind of said it before, but any reason that it fails to write to the SharePoint site, it does not perform the operation. So we're trying to mitigate that there would be any changes made to mailboxes where, you know, it was not logged.
Does that deny get logged that someone attempted to?
No, what it does is if it does fail to write to the SharePoint site, then it sends an email to the person that ran the app and then also to administrators so that we know.
All right. So Nick's probably going to kill me for asking this one, but, you know, something that Steve mentioned sort of spurred this thought in my mind. You know, I saw the term low code a couple of times. You know, would the two of you say that applied in this instance, developing this Power App?
I think the Power App and Power Automate portions of this are pretty low code.
Yeah.
But the, you know, the interface with the function is, you know, kind of where we're pushing things a little, right? And then because that data comes back into the app, that and dealing with that data and how to display it has definitely added some complexity that, you know, your standard, you know, upload all of my attachments that I get in email to OneDrive kind of app or flow wouldn't necessarily have, right? So we're trying to do complicated things here with the tools, so that added complexity to the development as well. So
yeah, definitely pushing the boundaries.
yeah, I would say more like medium code, just to be nice. Definitely not low code.
Was that, you think, based on based on sort of the characteristics of this particular customer, or just the technology?
The technology, right? I think for the citizen developer, like they call it, right? The user that wants to build a small form to collect data, or create some automation around their own personal processes. That definitely rings true, right? But to, you know, build a solution like this that, you know, multiple people are going to use and is going to perform complicated actions, that definitely kind of gets you out of the low code, you know, neighborhood at that point.
Was there any cost associated, any added cost to the customer when whether it be hardware or licensing?
Well, the customers that use this already had the PowerUp's licensing, so there is that requirement. And the Azure functions that this is triggering, you do get a good bit of usage of those for free before you hit the billing threshold. So we have not seen these apps hit that threshold yet. So no, it was very low cost to implement this for the customer.
Great. Well, I saw a couple of questions in the comments. Let me
Yeah, let me unmoderate everybody. So feel free to put your questions in the chat or come off mute in an orderly fashion.
I see one about integrating with ServiceNow. I know, Dave, you guys probably touch on it more than me, but I know there is a way to send a spreadsheet essentially to ServiceNow or attach it to a ticket, via email saying this work has been done.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely, it's easy to interface with the other cloud environments like ServiceNow, right? Even if that means that you have to build custom connectors or, just make HTTP calls. Basically, if you can reach that environment from the Microsoft data centers where these processes run, then the sky's the limit to interface with them, to either create tickets, close tickets, or update tickets, right?
Right. And let's see, Ken Nubler asks if we've tried to integrate this with calendaring permissions or any kind of booking policies through resource mailboxes. Ken, no, I don't think we've tried that yet. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a reason why that wouldn't work. Essentially, if you can run it through PowerShell, you can put it in a flow and present it through this GUI.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, we have full ability to administer anything in Exchange Online, right, through that app registration connection that the function has. It's just a matter of writing the PowerShell code to do it, and then working out the kinks. But anything that's available in an Exchange Online PowerShell module basically could be executed very easily by these functions through the app and the flow.
I hadn't thought about the booking one, but man, that seems like a perfect candidate for something like this. Just a real simple way to book a conference room or really anything.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good one, and that's a problem everybody struggles with, is how to book conference rooms.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the audience or Nick?
No, this is great stuff, guys. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through the solution. I definitely am a big fan of this sort of approach, and it's really neat how you guys kind of took really, this is a real world use case. That's something that you're using to help out government customers and fulfilling their mission and minimize some of the administrative cost and risk. So great use of the tools.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick. I mean, you nailed it. Both real world, it's a practical solution, no cost, and I mean, it had a ton of high visibility. I mean, leadership was really just blown away that in the time frame, and again, no cost, that we were able to pull this thing together. It's just an outstanding technology.
Absolutely. So I know there were some leftover questions from previous, and I know some folks may have some more questions here. So just want to open it up for a bit of open mic for anyone who has something either related to these presentations or on a completely different topic that they want to raise with the group. And then we'll wrap it up and close it out here. So feel free to come off mute or put something in the chat if you have anything, and we'll give it a few minutes and go from there.
I don't know. This is Brian. I don't know if Steve is still here. I had asked a question about Power Automate and copying actions and things. Maybe one of you guys can answer. Is there a way to copy and paste an action? Because I've done some Power Automate where you have similar flows in an if else, and you have to redo everything manually.
And hey, Brian, let me see if I can share my screen and kind of show you what you could do today. Just go ahead and share my screen real quick. I am having issues sharing my screen right now. One second here.
I'm glad it's you having problems with the demo, not me. Thank you.
Worked beautifully earlier. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know why I can't share my screen right now. I apologize. It's action by action that today you can copy and paste. I don't know that you can copy a collection of actions. I would have to research that to see if you could do that. But today you can copy individual actions from one flow to another. What you can do is if you have a flow, you could export the whole thing and import that, right? And then make changes to that too. So like if you had a flow that was going to be very similar to another and you had like 20 actions, that might be a better approach.
Okay. I didn't see how you're able. Is it just copying, just Control C, Control V?
Not Control C, Control V, but if you go to, and like, once again, I'm going to try to describe this, but if you go into a Power Automate flow, on the action itself, you can put 3 dots. Oh, Nick just put it out there. But there's 3 dots on the action, and you can say copy. And then when you go to create a new action, there's a thing all the way to the right that's from your clipboard, and that'll be all of the actions that you could then paste.
Oh, nice. All right, thanks. Sorry to bog you down with the technical thing, but appreciate it.
Yeah, no, good question.
That's what this is all about. So bring on the questions and any thoughts or comments or things people want to discuss. I've got a question for Robert and Dave. How did you? I know you guys are using effectively a service account or service principal, but from your Azure functions, how did you handle the credentials or the authentication from the Azure function to the service? In this case, sounds like Exchange Online.
Well, we were fortunate enough that the Exchange Online module semi-recently was adjusted to include certificate authentication as an option. So that's how we're doing it, right? We're using a certificate that's attached to the app registration and then stored in the file system of the function as a PFX, but we're storing the password to that PFX in the key vault. So that's very nice, right? And we're switching over all of our kind of administrative Exchange Online connections to use that same certificate auth model now that it's available.
Yeah, much more secure way to have automated or scripts that are on scheduled tasks to use that instead of encrypting a password within a text file.
For sure. Plus, now those service principals are authenticating based off a certificate versus just some secret.
Yep.
Even if the secret's protected, it's still just a secret.
Yep.
Right.
All right. So we can revoke the certificate. You know, you can use a customer supplied certificate, right? That's the great thing, right? When you're using that certificate authentication model on the app registration, the amount of the configuration required on the Azure side to trust that certificate is minimal. Literally, you just attach it to the app registration, right? So it can be an internal cert that is not, where the revocation information is not posted on the internet, which, is certainly a thing for government customers. A lot of their internal cert infrastructure is not exposed to the internet at all. So this allows you to still use that certificate infrastructure to issue these certs, without having to use a commercial cert, right? Or something that's visible on the internet.
Oh, that's great. Did you guys have to solve any challenges with conditional access rules or anything else? I know sometimes, especially government customers, have a number of policies that restrict connecting to, say, Exchange Online and where it can connect from. Did you guys have to account for it coming from the Azure function, or was that able to just be added into the policies that were there?
Yeah, you definitely have to use the public IPs of the Azure data center where you're hosting the function, and allow those into your conditional access policies. The great thing is, though, if that is a big concern, you can use a dedicated function,
right,
that will have the same IP address all the time, right, instead of a pool. So you can narrow down the conditional access, scope to a much smaller list of IPs, or even a single IP, if that's a requirement, right? It just it means that the Azure function costs a little bit more to execute, right? Because it's not part of a shared pool.
Yeah, other benefit of that is it's better performance as well.
Great stuff. Well, I know we're just about out of time, so just want to close out here. So thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. A huge round of applause for both of our presenters. Really, I definitely learned a lot and really enjoyed everything you guys had to share. So thank you very much. And just again, want to reiterate, please take the time to fill out the feedback form, share your feedback with the presenters of what you liked, as well as what we can do in the future. And I also want to call out a couple of other communities and events that may be coming up. So if you're not familiar with them, please check out the Microsoft Public Sector Tech community. There's a lot of great content on here, forums, blog articles. So it is kind of one of the go-to community outreach sources for public sector content at Microsoft. There also is the Azure Government DC Meetup. So this is the group that the Azure Government team runs, similar. That was inspiration for this community, and they have a number of monthly events, as well as the Nova365.ms users group. I believe this grew out of the DC SharePoint users group, and is another great community of folks who are interested in many, both Microsoft 365, Office 365, and Azure technologies. And this one is for the DC area. And then, of course, I don't know if Jeremy's still on, but definitely want to give a big shout out to the M365 Government DC users group, another similar community who has a lot of successful events each month. So encourage you to check that out if these are topics you're interested in. And I know also if you're interested in podcasts, one of the organizers of the Nova 365 group has a great podcast series called On the Spot, which talks about a lot of Microsoft Cloud ecosystem and public sector applications. So definitely a great resource to check out. And with that, that's all we have for tonight. So thank you all for joining us. Pleasure to have everybody, and look forward to seeing you again on April 20th. Have a great night, everyone.
Have a good evening.